Hello everyone, here I am with a second batch of mini reviews for October. Last week I got a couple comments on the variety of my selections, and I do like to mix it up, partly for me and my mom as we watch these movies, but also for you, the viewers. I figure if you're not into one film, maybe you'll be more interested in another. So I am picking fun ones and spooky ones, older ones and newer ones, putting together a sampler of horror, sci-fi, suspense, mystery, and monsters. Speaking of monsters, movie number 1 is a viewer recommendation, 1981's The Monster Club, a lighthearted anthology film that has Vincent Price's affable vampire bringing John Carradine's renowned horror novelist to the Monster Club to scope out fresh material for his next book. While there, Price expounds on monster genealogy, 4 musical acts perform, and 3 macabre tales are told. I loved seeing Price and Carradine together in their twilight years. Their little bits of conversation are charming, and Carradine as the bewildered victim of a vampire bite is just plain adorable. The club part, it felt like filler. The dance floor is crowded with people grooving to the music in cheesy Halloween masks. Not sure if those are supposed to be their real faces. And the bands, well, they weren't exactly my style. I found it difficult to determine who exactly this film was intended for. It seems to be targeting a younger audience, what with the humor and bright lighting and colors, but it can't be too young. The third story segment is pretty dark. It gets kind of evil a little bit, and there's a whole striptease act. I just feel like, okay, that's not for little kids. I wouldn't show this to my children. And it's especially weird because the stripper segment, a long build-up to one little gag, and by the way, you never see any actual nudity, comes right after the second story, which, of the 3, seems the most kid-friendly. It's a strange choice. I did like all 3 stories, which is saying a lot for an anthology film. Usually there's one that you feel meh about, but these were all nicely done, a little scary, but not too much, except for the third one. That went a little harder, and even had a moment where I was like, I don't know about this. The first story is sad, downright heartbreaking actually, but it also had the most frightening scare. The second story is more comical, it's a lot of fun, featuring Donald Pleasance in a marvelously hammy performance, and the third story is more disturbing. I can't decide which I liked most, maybe number 2. I found number 1 the most compelling, but number 2 made me laugh, and it had a great use of music as well. I enjoyed the story segments and the stuff with Price and Carradine, and the band interludes worked okay as a palate cleanser between stories, but I could have done without them. Movie number 2 is 1974's The Strange and Deadly Occurrence, which stars Robert Stack and Vera Miles as a city couple who move to a spacious property in the country with their teenage daughter. But it's not quite the paradise getaway they envisioned, as one problem after another pops up, and when the incidents start to become more distressing, they begin to wonder if someone or something is trying to scare them away. I think YouTube recommended this to me because of Crawl Space. They're both early 70s spooky TV movies with a couple stars who are maybe past their prime. I liked this much better. The picture quality is furry, and as is always the case with these scary TV movies, the scenes in the dark are kind of hard to make out. You find yourself saying, "What am I looking at?" But it's definitely watchable, a quick-moving and direct thriller about 3 people being harassed and threatened in their own home. It's fairly simple, nothing fancy here, and perhaps a hair predictable, but the performances and dialogue were good, and it was creepy and tense. I was especially impressed with some of the sounds in the last 20 minutes or so. Movie number 3 is 1944's Cry of the Werewolf, which stars Nina Foch as a leader of a tribe of gypsies that become embroiled in a murder investigation. This one's got a couple promising sequences, but to me, it never quite sticks the landing. Nina Falk is alright as the enigmatic inheritor of a werewolf curse, but I felt she underplayed her role. And while Blanche Yerka's presence is always intimidating, the rest of the supporting cast, with the exception of Barton McLean's colorful lead investigator, is lackluster. Leading man Stephen Crane in particular was not good. I seldom call out bad acting, but after he had been on screen for just a couple minutes, I was like, oh my goodness, he's awful. He's bland, and he often fails to emote properly, like he's speaking lines without actually considering their meaning. I looked him up afterward, and I guess I should go easy on him. This was his first film, first of only 3, and he himself later said that he was, quote, a very poor actor. He found much greater success as owner of a successful chain of Polynesian-themed restaurants. He was also twice married to actress Lana Turner and father of her only child, the daughter who killed Turner's boyfriend. And that was a whole rabbit trail that I went down that we don't have time to talk about today, but wow! That whole story was interesting. Cry of the Werewolf doesn't boast much in the way of effects or monster makeup. There's none, actually, just some shadow play and edits to imply transformations. If you've got a minuscule budget, it gets the job done, but it isn't exactly exciting or fear-inducing, and as a whole, I found the film mediocre. It's clearly influenced by 41's The Wolfman and 42's Cat People, but it never manages to be as interesting, compelling, or creative as either of those films. Movie number 4 is a viewer recommendation, 1989's The Woman in Black, a British ghost story in which a city solicitor is sent to the country to attend to the affairs of a recently deceased widow. When he has multiple sightings of a strange lady in mourning, and unnerving things occur at the widow's secluded house in the marsh, he begins to fear that he's stumbled onto something sinister. Stories and movies about ghosts are hit or miss with me, but there are a few I like, and I liked this one. It's modestly done, but still accomplishes its goal, proving that you don't have to do a lot to make a convincingly creepy film. It takes its time unfolding the story and building a sense of foreboding, and it's got a likable main character in Arthur Kidd, who is played by Adrian Rollins. He's a loving husband and devoted father, great with little kids, an all-around good guy who gets sent on what should be a comprehensive but routine assignment and instead finds himself pulled into a mystery with disastrous consequences. Co-starring is Bernard Hepton, who my mom and I recognized immediately, but it took us a couple seconds to place him as the Commandant in the excellent series Colditz. His character here is just ambiguous enough to keep you guessing. I also appreciated that this was spooky without any of the trappings that make me uncomfortable that I try to avoid. No seances, no possession, none of that stuff, just good old-fashioned gothic vibes. What was weird is that I rented this movie on DVD from the library, and it looked official enough, but the quality is wonky. It's obviously a transfer of a cassette tape. The movie was recorded off of someone's TV, who knows when, maybe as far back as 1989, and then it was digitized and mass-produced, apparently. There's no menu, and it even cuts off the end titles mid-scroll. It was strange. But the low resolution and some glitches in the picture occasionally, very quick, and some in the music, if you know what I'm talking about, didn't take away from my enjoyment. It just made me feel more retro, like I was watching a tape that I had dug out of our collection and popped it into the VCR, and lo and behold, it still played! There was another adaptation released a few years ago starring Daniel Radcliffe. From what I read, I guess it's a remake, but they made a number of significant changes, so many that it has very little in common with this movie, content-wise and style-wise. I haven't seen the other movie, so I can't compare them, but I did like the simplicity and subtlety of this one. I liked the plotting of the story, and the relatability of the family man protagonist plunked into an eerie situation. Movie number 5 is a viewer recommendation, 1960's Mill of the Stone Women, an Italian horror film set in the Netherlands in the 19th century, where a young man comes to help an older sculptor promote his statue show in preparation for a special event, but he becomes distracted by the sculptor's enticing daughter, who suffers from a mysterious malady. This movie exists somewhere between a Hammer horror film and a giallo film. It has rich, saturated colors and features buxom, dramatically coiffed young ladies. It's gothic in a way, but it has a few bombastic moments. While it's not a monster movie, it does have some mad science and suggestions of emotional and even clinical vampirism. Plus, the mechanical parade of historical women, most of whom are depicted in gruesome poses, is strongly reminiscent of House of Wax. So this is an interesting mashup of styles and concepts and images. I just can't decide if I liked the film or not. There were aspects that didn't grab me, scenes that were a little dull, or weren't done as smoothly as I think they could have been. But there were also scenes that were super creepy. It's got some cool sets and strong imagery and eccentric behavior galore, which leads the protagonist and the viewer into a bizarre scenario that crescendos in a crazy finale that is an excellent payoff, even if it felt like it took a while to get there. And movie number 6 is 2007's 28 Weeks Later, the sequel to 2002's 28 Days Later. It picks up 28 weeks after a viral pandemic has struck Britain and completely incapacitated it. After a period of quarantine and cleanup by American troops, refugees are being allowed to come back in small increments. But the effort to return to normalcy may be too hasty. For the horror genre in general, and zombie stuff in particular, director Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later was a game changer and a trendsetter, like George Romero's Night of the Living Dead had been in 1968. Boyle and screenwriter Alex Garland were producers on this sequel, and if you're familiar with the first movie, I think you can detect a difference. This lacks a certain rawness 28 Days Later had. But there's a mood that does carry through, a grimness that characterizes both films, as well as a graininess to the picture quality at times that helps bind them together. 28 Weeks Later stars Robert Carlyle, Jeremy Renner, and Rose Byrne, and rather than just continuing with a standard zombie apocalypse survival story, it introduces an intriguing twist to propel the story forward. One thing that made 28 Days Later so remarkable is that it made zombies scary again. Instead of shuffling around, these zombies were able to run, which means they were a lot harder to get away from, especially if you weren't in good shape, so I would be toast. And the sickness is dubbed the Rage Virus with good reason. The infected are kind of like homicidal maniacs. The movie earns its R rating, not just with a couple randy bits, but with plenty of gore and blood sprays. There are quite a few instances of blood, and that was gross. There was one point where I was like, no, okay, I don't want to see anymore. It was the eyeball thing. Fortunately, there's nobody standing there forcing me to watch the screen all of the time. So I did look away for that. I don't close my eyes when I'm watching scary movies because I can still hear what's going on, and then I'm just picturing what's happening, and chances are what I'm picturing is actually worse than what's going on screen. So I choose to look away for really icky parts. And when somebody does the eyeball thing, That really... That's... no. An additional factor that makes the violence shocking is that some of the attacks seem so personal, which fits with the idea the film introduces that it's possible an infected person might retain some of their humanity. Taking that into consideration, it makes the violence feel more vindictive than it is in your average zombie movie. This film definitely has bleak moments, including at least one that makes you go, no! And that's another thing it has in common with the first film. The zombies are fast and relentless, so there's that, but the humans aren't all overflowing with compassion either. So there's some stuff that makes the whole situation feel pretty hopeless. It's not an uplifting film, but it does make for a good scary movie. It's not as stark or as iconic as the first film, but I didn't love 28 Days Later, and I've never been inclined to watch it a second time, so I do think I kind of enjoyed this more, maybe? And that's it for week 2. I hope you enjoyed this video. I understand that some of you may be looking forward to the end of this month because you're not into scary movies, and you know, that's okay. I don't like a lot of them either. There are so many horror movies out there that I don't like or I won't watch for one reason or another, no matter how famous or popular they are. And if you're in that boat too, I want to encourage you not to let anybody make you feel bad about that, and don't let anyone pressure you into watching something you don't feel you should see. I also acknowledge, on a more serious note, that you might not be in the mood for this kind of thing right now because what's happening in the real world is terrifying enough, and you don't need to watch movies to see monsters doing horrendous, evil things. So, if you're not looking for this kind of entertainment right now, I totally understand. I will be back with another round next week. You can find all the films I talked about here today listed in the description. Let me know your thoughts on anything I mentioned in the comments below. I look forward to hearing what you all have to say, and I'll see you again next week. Thanks for watching.